Okay, I just hit play now.
Everyone, I want to wish you a very happy Earth Day. I am so excited to be doing this town hall this morning with some of my absolute favorite elected officials in all of Illinois that are amazing climate champs for their constituents and who are fighting so hard for the environment every day. And we're going to talk a lot about climate change today. We're going to talk a lot about the way that federal government and the money that has come from federal government can be best used at the city of Chicago. I'm really excited to be celebrating Earth Day this way. Of course, I'd rather be outside in a park on a sunny day, but it is a rainy day. It's going to be sunny this weekend. So we'll put a link to some of the clean and greens in the city and in other parts of the state in the chat before the end. And I hope that you go out and enjoy Earth Day in whatever way you can. So I'm going to pass it off to our city programs director, Ayana Simba, who is going to introduce the elected officials and have them start with a statement about their work. And then we are welcoming questions in the chat. So Ayana, go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. Hi, everyone. Ayana Simba, the City Programs Director for IEC. And also, these are my favorite elected officials who are really pushing forward some of the climate initiatives that IEC is supporting. Right now, we have Congressperson Jan Schakowsky from the Illinois 9th District with us. We have Alder Andre Vasquez from the 40th Ward, and we also have Alder Maria Hadden from the 49th Ward. And so we have kind of a federal and then city level thing going on here. IEC will try to fill in the blanks on state level stuff. But maybe first, Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, if you wanted to introduce yourself and then answer the question of what are some of the most important accomplishments and priorities when it comes to environmental protection, or what are some of your most important accomplishments and priorities when it comes to environmental protection?
Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, you're on mute.
Let me just say a great thank you for allowing me to be participating in this and such a wonderful group. Thank you, Jen Welling, for your years and years of leadership. And let me just say, I remember the first Earth Day. It was in 1970. About 2 million people in thousands of places all around the country participated. And you probably, most of you won't remember, but at that time, there was no Environmental Protection Agency. There was no Clean Water or Clean Air Act. The president of the United States at that time was Richard Nixon. And by the way, we did manage to get, and the activists managed to get a whole bunch of things done. So I am on the Environment and Climate Change Subcommittee in the House of Representatives, but for years, for the 2+ decades that I've served in the Congress, I've really been working on the environment. I would say of late, the most important thing that I got done, it's still only halfway done, is in the Build Back Better bill, which there was a lot of talk about all the wonderful things that were in there. I along with the Progressive Caucus, made sure that the House of Representatives passed that legislation. It had $500 billion to address the climate crisis in all different ways. Climate justice communities, the kind of discrimination that we see, to address the issue of fossil fuels and lower our dependence on them, to create millions of clean jobs. We are still hoping and working to get a substantial bill that will advance us. Now, the infrastructure bill, which I also voted for, everyone has heard about that big infrastructure legislation, did have about $1/3 trillion for climate, but we want to do way more. In addition, I am the sponsor of really what is the most comprehensive and I think sort of bold bill. Myself and Annette Berrigan from California, the Future Generations Protection Act, HR 6168, which is a piece of legislation that, number one, would eliminate all fracking, no more fracking to, drill oil out of the ground. No expansion of oil and natural gas for energy production, and no exporting of oil and gas from the United States of America. No, it's not the whole thing, but it is a bold proposal, and I am hoping very much that we're going to get it. I'm very disappointed, let me just say, that there was a decision to allow some limited drilling in public lands because we're trying to in the efforts to try and increase oil supply. And really, I've been focusing on how the oil companies right now are gouging us by raising their prices. But anyway, so those are the kinds of things that I'm working on right now, and I will yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman. With that, I'm going to pass it off to 40th Ward Alder Andre Vasquez to introduce yourself and answer the same question. What are some of the most important accomplishments or priorities of yours related to environmental protection?
Sure, absolutely. So Alder Andre Vasquez of the 40th Ward. So that's Andersonville, Edgewater, Lincoln Square area. I did not initially come out as an elected official just thinking about the environment first. I mean, I got kids, so I think about that. But what I saw once coming into office is there are a lot of very solvable issues that I think we weren't really addressing. So early in my term, there was a block in the neighborhood where the whole block had trees being cut down because of water main work that was happening. So one of the first pieces of legislation that we moved forward was to really do a study to figure out what other methods. There's something called cured in place piping that can fortify our water mains so that it could prevent trees from being needlessly cut. So that was one of the first things we started working on. Since then, I've also signed on board for the native garden registry. So the city was looking to make sure that for neighbors who wanted to keep native gardens, that was being supported. So we worked on that. What we've been doing most recently was a lot of tree work. So through the last budget, part of what I, along with others, negotiated was to double the amount of tree trim crews because we saw how our canopy was being affected in a way that wasn't properly being maintained. That led into really a whole new world of conversations. Some around, making sure that we save our ash tree population by inoculating it, as the city had stopped doing it over a number of years. So we've been really taking on that kind of a fight, which I didn't, like I said, I didn't anticipate, but really seeing the need for trying to fortify that and making sure that if we are going to plant all the new trees that are coming as part of a city initiative, that we're doing it in a managed fashion. So, we've been working on that. And the other thing that I had not thought I was going to do, I learned how to ride a bike at 42. So if you're laughing, that is the proper response. If you're shocked, also the proper response. But once I learned that, I just really understood the value of bike infrastructure. And all of a sudden, that became a whole separate wing of what we're working on, and understanding that the more you create bike infrastructure and provide multimodal means of transportation, the more you're moving people off of cars, vehicles, and gas, right? So it's also not only some of the things that we're working on, but also some of the things that we're working against. I don't want to see gas cards being passed out everywhere, right? I think it promotes the wrong kind of incentive and behavior when we should be promoting public transportation. So that's just some of the work that we've been doing. And I think as opportunities present themselves to make sure we're making the right decisions and responsible ones as a city, we're going to time and time again step up because we need to.
Thank you, Alder Vasquez. And yeah, definitely with the gas card comment, I was like, can I get a free venture card? Can you do that for me? Even 6 months will help. And now I'll pass it over to Alder Maria Hadden from the 49th Ward.
Thank you so much. And again, happy Earth Day. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. The 49th Ward has long been home to constituents who've been active in environmental action, in raising awareness around climate change, but all things environment, from local recycling initiatives to what we're doing and managing and being good stewards of our waterways and our lakefront, to even things that may not seem quite environmental, but I think tap into that as well. And that's concerns around nuclear weapons, nuclear powers and things of that sort. So being a representative from the 49th Ward means being a good representative and working on environmental policy. Some of the things that we've worked on from my office and in my time, big win that I think we got this year, and IEC certainly has been a fantastic partner in this, is our fossil fuel divestment. So our former treasurer, Kurt Summers, began this work, and working with community organizations like 360, right? We were able to work with our current treasurer, Treasurer Melissa Conyers-Irvin, whose office closed that final gap of making sure the city of Chicago was fully divested from fossil fuels. So these are small things, right? But the small things and like the small impacts and the incremental things add up to large impacts, both in real terms, right? When we're talking about our dollars and cents, and also in, of course, what we can contribute to collectively in shifting the conversation, right, around what we're looking for in the future. So it was a big deal for the city of Chicago, right, to kind of join a few other cities in making that divestment step. So really excited to have been able to work with 360.org, the treasurer's office, right, and our residents and other groups like IEC to make that a reality. I'll say that we also have a lot of work that we do in managing our lakefront. So as we know, with climate change, we're seeing changing cycles, right, of how our environment is reacting. We're seeing changing levels in Lake Michigan. And so this is not an accomplishment so much so as I think something that I see squarely as priority from my office, which is changing the way the city works on managing the lakefront. We often and easily in the city think about the lakefront as a fantastic asset, right? I think we've got some new tourism things touting like our 26 beaches, and they are fantastic assets, right? And great reasons why people live here, what we can enjoy and why people visit. And also, we don't have a consistent lakefront management policy or body. And those are some things that I'm looking to continue working toward, especially with residents and constituents that I represent who, 2019, 2020, those winters and those high lake levels of Lake Michigan had waves pounding people's homes, right? We don't have the protection of Lakeshore Drive when we think about our access to the lake, and it's both a benefit, but I think also makes Rogers Park residents and South Shore residents in Chicago too, right? Be really tapped in to what's happening with our lakefront. It's impossible for us to ignore it. Other accomplishments, today the climate action pillars were released, and I know Ayana's been key player in working on that. But I'm proud to be an alderperson that has been working with our fledgling environmental policy people, working to try and get the funding to bring back our Department of Environment, and that we're going to continue pushing that work to make sure that the city of Chicago is putting our funds and our resources into our future. We need a Department of Environment. Happy to see this administration has made some of the initial investments, and we've got a great chief sustainability officer working with groups like IEC to help us create these climate pillars. And now as legislators, it's our job to make sure that we can get the funding so that we can actually live up to the plan and to the pillars. So happy to be a champion for environmental issues and work with our colleagues to continue to raise these issues. Last thing I'll say is they show up in small ways, right? There are a lot of environmental impact decisions that alder people make that may not fit squarely in our Committee on Environment and Energy, right? That may not be attached to our climate action pillars. And I'll say, as somebody who sits on the zoning committee, we've had a few issues that have come up that directly fall into environmental justice issues. So whether it's the matte asphalt plant, which is something that was pretty controversially approved, I'd say before our time. But, you know, sometimes we still face issues like putting affordable housing next to hazardous polluting things. And I think making sure that in every role in every committee that I'm on, that I try and bring the lens of environmental justice and climate realities to the table and to the decision making is something that I work hard to do. So thanks for having me here.
Thank you so much, Alder Hadden, and thank you all for those wonderful introductions. Alder Hadden almost gave half my presentation, so I can keep it a little bit short. Before we hop into the Q&A, I'm just going to do a really quick overview about, you know, what does climate change mean in the Chicagoland region and some of the efforts that IEC is supporting and those efforts that these elected officials that are joining us have done a great job at supporting as well. So let me just share my screen really quick. The joys of virtual. Okay, there we go. Had some pictures up and everything ready. But yeah, thank you all again for joining us for the Earth Day celebration. I kind of already talked about the agenda, introductions, a little quick presentation and Q&A. For those folks who have joined us and haven't in the last 10 minutes figured out who IEC is, long story short, we are a coalition organization. We represent over 100 different environmental organizations throughout the state. And we've been around since 1975 and really aimed at protecting Illinois' plants, animals, and overall environment and building up environmental champions throughout the state. A little bit more about what we do: advocacy, outreach, and education is our main goal. And again, just making sure that individuals feel like environmental champions. So what exactly does climate change mean in the Chicagoland area? So I think sometimes when we think about climate change, we think of like hurricanes, or we think of tornadoes or droughts way off in the West, but we do have to recognize that the Chicagoland area and the Midwest as a whole is far from immune to the impacts of climate change. And we're already seeing that, right? We've seen more infrequent, intense rainstorms. We've seen how we've had increasingly high shorelines. And in fact, in summer of 2020, or the spring of 2020, that was actually the wettest spring on record. And that was also the same year that the Lake Michigan levels reached record high levels and ended up spilling into things like the Lakeshore Drive and also harming and damaging communities along the lakefront, including beaches, people's homes. So, you know, recognizing that these storms are actually affecting people's livelihoods. And then we also have at the opposite end, we have longer and hotter heat waves. So we have just longer times where it's going to be extremely hot. And I don't mean like, oh, it's going to be 80 or 90. Like we are starting to see more days where it's getting towards 100. And really with this, I want to emphasize that longer, hotter heat waves don't always mean for everyone that, oh, it's a fun in the sun day or a beach day or stay inside and turn on your AC. For people with disabilities, for the elderly, for the homeless, heat waves pose significant health threats. And then we also have at the total opposite end of heat, we have extreme cold. I think Alder Hadden had mentioned people talking about the winters, right? I think, what was that? That was 2019 when we had temperatures dipping below like record levels. So seeing this kind of yo-yo back and forth of extreme weather is something that we are going to continue to see. And then finally, with environmental rollbacks, you know, we can't ignore what has happened during the previous administration underneath the Trump administration. We know that what happens at the federal level does impact what we do here at the state and local level, and how well we are prepared for climate impacts versus how unprepared we are significantly impact the what actually happens to people on the ground. And then I want to emphasize that climate impacts do not fall across the Chicagoland equitably, but we know that due to a history of redlining and zoning laws, that Black and Brown communities continue to bear the brunt of climate impacts and are also the same places that serve as dumping grounds for industry. So what that really means is that a lot of environmental justice communities are not only facing impacts directly related to climate change, but these impacts are exacerbated by climate change. So for a lot of communities, for example, like what I have here in this picture is Little Village that have poor air quality. This is a result from an implosion, but that area is an environmental justice community. But a lot of these environmental justice communities do tend to have higher levels of asthma and upper respiratory issues. So when we have really, really hot days, that induces smog that worsens the air quality. I know some folks might be familiar with like weather apps, and you'll see during the summer, you should check and you'll start to see when there's days that it's a lot warmer, that tends to be when there's a lot poorer air quality. And then we also know that a lot of communities, specifically here in Chicago on the south and west sides, do tend to lack trees. And so it's not only just an aesthetic impact, but it means that when temperatures are reaching 100+ degrees and you don't have a place to hide in the shade, or that your home is being directly exposed to sunlight, that's putting you at greater risk of heat ailments. And then finally, just overall, just recognizing the cumulative impact that climate change and pollution can have on our communities. And I really want to call out these communities. These are Black and Brown and low-income communities specifically, not only just here in Chicago, but also in the surrounding suburbs that are being disproportionately impacted by climate change. So how do we go about addressing climate change? IEC, we are supporting quite a few things. At the federal level, we are supporting the passage of comprehensive climate legislation. So some of the things that Congresswoman Schakowsky had talked about earlier, provisions from the Build Back Better Act, including things like tax incentives for low carbon emissions like solar. And we also want to see an increase in environment-related spending packages for states. So some of the things that made way for a lot of the funding in the Chicago budget for climate initiatives such as ARPA and the infrastructure bill, we want to see more spending like that allows states to not only just focus on climate mitigation efforts, but also things like improving the transportation network, weatherization programs, lead service line replacement, things that really do require that federal investment. And then finally, we want to see stronger executive action. Like I had mentioned before, the rules and regulations that happen at the federal level have a significant impact on what we can and will do at the state and local level. And then at the state level, we had a huge victory this past year, the passage of the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. This was something that was years in the making and is essentially going to put Illinois onto a path of a 100% carbon-free economy by 2050. It includes things such as a just transition, so prioritizing jobs in communities that are disproportionately impacted by climate change, but are also the same communities that are often taken advantage of by fossil fuel companies. And overall, CJA sends a message that we can fight climate change while also boosting the economy and providing good paying, clean jobs. And then we also have the House Bill 4093, which is the EJ permitting bill. And this will essentially make it a lot more difficult for developers to try to push through projects or polluting projects in communities that are already overburdened. This is something that we were able to pass through the House, and we hope to finish out and have it signed into law after this veto session later this fall. And then finally, at the city level, Alder Hadden that brought up a couple of these initiatives, the Climate Action Plan that's being revamped for the first time since 2008. We have the We Will Chicago Planning Initiative. We had the launch of the Food Equity Council. This past budget included $188 million for climate infrastructure. But at the same time, we need to have a team that actually matches the size of these climate efforts, right? We have a small but mighty team in the mayor's office, but they deserve to be supported by adequate staff so that we're actually carrying out these initiatives that we're putting into place now. We also know that without a Department of Environment, environmental inspections and enforcement are down. We know that it's much harder for people to engage in the zoning and planning process without a department. And then we also know at the federal level, as we receive more attention to and spending in climate change, that having a Department of Environment puts Chicago in a much better position to quickly implement those dollars. So for the fiscal year 2023 budget that's coming up this fall, IEC is really going to be advocating for funding to reinstate a new Department of Environment. So finally with that, I always like to just conclude, what can you do? Because I always get this question all the time from friends and family. There are a lot of different things. I think at the individual level, being a more conscious consumer, we live in a time where there's a lot more opportunities and different products available. If you really do want to be a much more conscious consumer, you have those options. But then I also think at the bigger level, we need to hold corporations accountable. And part of that meaning that, I mean, hey, if you literally want to tweet at Clorox or whatever, you can literally do that. But I also mean supporting your elected officials like those on this call who are trying to pass the legislation that protects our environment, passes the legislation that is trying to fight off climate change, and making sure that our elected officials are supported enough so that they can actually go toe to toe with corporations. Also, back to a personal level, volunteering, engaging with IEC and our affiliate partners, engaging with local park councils. And then, of course, you know, shameless plug, following IEC social media, subscribing to our emails and newsletters, promise we won't bombard you. So these are a few things that you can do even starting now here on Earth Day. So with that, we're going to hop into the Q&A portion. Thank you all for just being on and listening to my quick presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then I'm going to kick us off with some questions. And then I'll also try to incorporate some of the questions from the audience as well. So getting to the first question, we're going to start off a little bit light, but one of the questions I have is, what has been your personal experience with climate change, or what have you noticed as evidence of a changing climate? And also, what climate-related issues do you hear most about from your constituents? I think we'll start with Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky for this question.
We get a lot of communication. Let me see. We get a lot of communication from our constituents on climate. Lots of times it's to support certain legislation that is there, but it's also the age is interesting because we get a lot of young people who call, and if you look around at those who are the most active and some of the leaders in the addressing the climate crisis, you're going to find young people. I was just at two high schools this week, and even a grammar school, and those students are bringing up the issues of climate and what are we going to do. And quite naturally, you know, this is their century. This is their lives, their children, their grandchildren that they're worried about. They don't want, you know, they understand that 1.5 degree centigrade, and after that, it's disaster for the planet, that we, you know, see sea life disappear, and we see more flooding, and we see. I just got some money for one of our communities to avert some of the flooding. There's, you know, we get those calls too, because there's the, you know, so-called 100-year floods that are happening every other year or every year. And so people are feeling that very personally in their, you know, in their very lives and in their homes. So there are so many things that may not even be identified directly with climate and environment. You know, we have more lead pipes in Chicago area, and actually in Illinois, than any other state. We just had a hearing on clean water. And what I found was that Illinois, even though we have the most, is just disproportionately not funded. And, you know, schools have had to turn off the water fountains. People who get their water tested, not just in certain communities, but all over the suburbs, et cetera, are finding that there is lead in their service lines. And we need help. The federal government has given some help, but we need more in Illinois for that. So a lot of things defined as environmental issues. And I just want to say, those people who love to feed your birds, we have been asked not to do that right now because there is a bird flu that is very contagious, and we don't want that spread. And that's something that, you know, I'm really sad about that. I love to look out the window and see the birds eating. We shouldn't be doing that right now. You know, all of these things are related, and we need to act on all fronts. I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Alder Hadden?
Thank you. Thanks for that. Thanks for that announcement on the bird flu, Congresswoman. I know I was reading about that this morning. And we do have a lot of nature lovers here in the 49th Ward as well. I'll say I mentioned briefly, but being a lakefront community, I think one of the biggest indicators we have of impact and changes are those lake levels. So during those high lake level times, the real threats, like I know a lot of folks who maybe who don't live on the far north side or the south side, South Shore area. You might have seen a lot of the high lake levels along Lakeshore Drive, right? Or seen some of the news footage, but people in their homes had just like ice waves, high winds, things that were threatening their homes. They were threatening Sheridan Road. We were losing 1 to 2 feet of land to erosion during each major storm event in 2019 and 2020. We had to put in $1 million of rubble mound revetment along Howard Beach and Rogers Beach, right, and East Lake Terrace. And those beaches are gone. And of course, these have like really direct, real impacts on the neighbors who live there and use those spaces. And also there are hidden impacts, right? Impacts to our deeper infrastructure, lots of questions that these raise that play into long-term planning as well. Certainly the heat and cooling cycles are a big concern here. We have a large number of senior citizens living in senior buildings, our high schools, right? Our students who are in buildings, and with school years, when we look at cooling, finding enough funding to upgrade our infrastructure in order to keep up with these changes is a huge challenge. And so, thank our Congresswoman on supporting all those efforts for the funding that we need. But we see this on a daily basis. So residents who need funding help with even utility costs. So we can see that as well as another big impact of what's happening when you have to heat your home longer or cool your home more. What we're seeing with our electricity and gas bills is something that definitely comes through our office all the time. And while we work a lot of times on the immediate response and alleviating issues, it can be challenging to find the time also. This is why groups like IEC are great to think about what the solutions are, right? My concern when a constituent calls is how can we get that person immediate aid so that they can keep their heat on, right? Or pay their gas bill, or make sure they have a cooling device, right? For their home. And also that's triage, right? That's triage, that's working on symptoms of climate, symptoms of environmental change. And we also have to do the double duty of thinking about the policy and working with the government, nonprofit, and corporate partners to make the changes that are necessary in order for us to create the infrastructure, the circumstances, and the conditions so that we don't have so many of those symptomatic changes on the back end.
If I could just add to that, of course, the 49th Ward is also, right on my district, but I just wanted to say the Army Corps of Engineers through the infrastructure program has gotten money now, significant money to deal with the lakefront and lakefront erosion. And of course, that is one of our most precious assets, all of us share, you were there, I believe, Maria, when the Army Corps of Engineers came, Army Corps of Engineers came to talk about what they were going to be able to do. So we need to, all of us, work in partnership. Our organizations and our at the state, the local, and the federal level to get this all done. So thanks.
Feel free.
Sure, yeah, I'll add, I think on a personal level, it's actually changed a lot of my personal lifestyle. I was a big burger steak person, and like really understanding the effect of how we mass produce like that and its effect on climate, waste, everything else coming. Like I am now a pescatarian and my whole family's vegetarian, which is something if you would have told me that was going to happen a decade ago, I would not have bet on that. So on a personal level, that's affected me. But as far as like on the city level, the thing that we've seen, definitely the storms. Like we went from summers where it was a summer to a summer having an average of like 1 or 2 really big storms that were knocking trees down, that we all got to we get the calls about how we address that, right? And that's its own challenge when the city doesn't always have the resources to do so. But one thing that's really pertinent now is anybody that goes on any of the roads out there, you can see the difference in potholes and sinkholes because the amount of rain that's just changed, right? It's flooding all these streets. It's going 24 to 48 hours without any of it really draining down. And we're talking about like water mains and pipes that are like 80 to 100 years old. So you're seeing those break more often, which is leading to more costs. There are concerns, obviously, with the lead lining on many of them. So that's another thing. But the roads themselves, if you see how you get cold summers, warm winters, it's like a mix and match. Its effect on the asphalt, how it breaks, and the sinkholes that you're seeing everywhere. We're spending so much just to try to cover holes and then try to repave things that I really could say that anything you see that you might have a complaint about as it regards to the city, garbage collection, for example, are all being affected by climate change. And thinking about the fact that we've all undergone through global trauma under COVID, and on a mental health level, seeing how everybody's been affected, all those things permeate through, and it has so many different effects on all of us that I think it's the struggle to find something that's not related to the environment and climate that we're being affected by.
Thank you, Alder Vasquez. That was very well said and kind of tied it all together. And then really how my personal self identify when thinking about environment is that it's not separate from the pothole in the street. It's not separate from this violence that we see in the city. Like it's all connected. I know, Jen, you wanted to ask a question about recycling. I think this is also Claudia Jackson who asked this question, but Jen's going to present it.
Yeah, so I'm going to ask a question from Claudia Jackson, who's very active with the Chicago League of Women Voters and Coalition for Plastic Recycling, which is Chicago is the 3rd largest city in the U.S. We are woefully behind New York and LA in waste strategies. We need to ban single-use plastics, provide municipal composting, and enforce recycling. What are the barriers to getting this done? You're going to share any ideas? What are our big thoughts on how we fix our waste system in the city and work that we can do on the federal level?
Yeah, I can mention at least at a city level. Something that I saw when we came in office was like the deal with waste management, which is the one that handles a lot of the garbage and recycling. So the challenge there is you've got the same company doing both, right? And when you don't have strict guidelines on what you want to incentivize, it becomes easier and less costly for a business to go, we'll just take all the garbage and put in a landfill as opposed to recycling. And so when you've got those kind of profit incentives, it's going to drive folks to do whatever they view as least costly, which is why, if I remember correctly, the city maybe recycles 3% of like what's being submitted for recycling. So some of it is also making sure that the public understands what can be recycled, what can't, making sure things are clean when you put them in. But some of it, at least at the city level, is looking at those contracts and making sure that there isn't that kind of conflict where someone who's charged with recycling also stands to gain by just dumping in a landfill and really, on their perspective, going forward with the path of least resistance and still being able to collect a check. So I think it's how we look at those agreements that matters too.
Can I just follow up with a question? You know, I was just looking into the whole plastics issue. I mean, I don't see a major campaign to just deplasticize our plastic size or whatever our environment. You know, we have a beach house in Michigan City. My kids and family used to go down the beach and collect beach glass. There's hardly any glass anymore. It's all plastic. Everything is plastic. The oceans are full of plastic. And I'm just wondering, is there an effort, and are there now recyclable, really recyclable plastics, or those that, will disappear in the environment? I mean, what are we doing about plastic? We're overwhelmed with it.
Yeah. I mean, I think I can answer some of this, but I know that we have got some heroes on this. Jordan Parker, who worked with the Bring Your Own Bag and the bag fee in the city, as well as Claudia, who asked that question, and Catherine. I think there are major campaigns on just removing the amount of plastic that we're using, because how is recycling supposed to work well when everything is in a different package and consumers can't, it's not easy to pick. Being sustainable is not the default option. Some of those plastics do belong in the trash. And so from from IEC's perspective, there are pieces of federal legislation, even Senator Durbin, I just make fun of it because he's got a piece of legislation on nurdles, which are the before you make plastic, the small balls that you manufacture plastic out of. So he's got a piece on that. And I know we've been working on how do you just even reduce single-use plastic utensils that are given out, not make that the default option anymore. So there's definitely work being done, but definitely we could be promoting it more. I know Alliance for the Great Lakes has a lot of really good scientific studies on their beach cleanups. They actually will count how much plastic people are bringing in. So we know that this is out there, and we gotta do something. But we'll connect you with even more info to stop producing so much plastic.
We all have to, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if anybody else wants to add to that one. What are we going to do about recycling?
I think I'll echo the Congresswoman's sentiments. Frequently, it makes me just feel like I want to throw my hands up and say, what are we doing about recycling? I can remember moving here to Illinois. So my first year in Illinois was not in Chicago. It was spent in Lake County. I lived in Mundelein. I worked in Waukegan. I did AmeriCorps for a year. And it was actually the first place I lived that had recycling. And it was mandatory and it was enforced, and it was not single stream recycling. We had separate bins that we were given with instructions, and we were fined, right, if we contaminated our recycling. How we moved from those kind of best practices to where we are now, even understanding the complications of looking for solutions for cities like Chicago, I can't help but think that it's just about laziness and money. The whole setup of how we recycle in this city seems to be lacking in accountability at all levels. And it's very difficult, as you all mentioned, now that there doesn't really seem to be a lot of education about it, right? We're not choosing to prioritize this as a city at every level, and educating people about what it is and figuring out both incentives and, of course, penalties that we should have in place in order to make sure that it happens. Even looking at when I did move to Chicago and seeing that, the residential building that I rented in didn't have recycling. And according to the city ordinance, they were supposed to, right? But they didn't. And now as an older person, we deal with the fact that, recycling companies, the waste management companies, right? They're not holding up their end of the bargain either. Right. And there's so many things wrong with the system. I feel like we should start over. But what we need is a political will from the mayor, from council, from the county, from the state, to all be on the same page. And I feel like we're still just kind of passing the buck and finding ways to thinking that we can buy our way out of it and creating more waste, and the real solutions aren't there. I would love to see more federal regulation on actually helping to stem the creation of the plastics, of non-recyclable things. I don't know why we don't have more regulations on what companies are allowed to produce, but certainly we're not simply going to educate ourselves out of it. And so we need a multi-pronged approach that the local level needs help.
Thank you.
Oh, I just looked, I'm like, why am I the main person? I got spotlighted. Okay. Thank you all for answering that question. And thank you, Congresswoman Schakowsky, for kind of shifting the conversation. It's a little bit interesting. Wasn't even thinking about plastics earlier, so appreciate that. I'll ask another question, and then I know we have some more questions in the chat from the audience. But I think this one is really specific for Alder Hadden and Alder Vasquez. And as I mentioned earlier, IEC, we'd like to see the reestablishment of the Department of Environment. Not only is this like essential to environmental protection, but it's also an initiative that Mayor Lightfoot committed to during her 2019 campaign. So, I mean, beyond carrying out the city's climate agenda, do you imagine a department better facilitating city services like recycling or tree maintenance or anything?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say all of the above. I think when you look at all the different departments, they're so at times overwhelmed with their particular functions and priorities, right? You've got streets and sanitation, Department of Transportation, that there's so much on their plate with their core functions of their role. They don't often, I know they don't apply the lens of the environment to the work that they do to find efficiencies, see how to address things that are more, climate, environment related. Like I mentioned, the potholes, right? The Department of Transportation is busy trying to fill them in due to complaints to think about like more long-term strategy and what investments necessary. So I do believe you need a Department of Environment to have sort of an overview on all of the departments and how city works, right? Because when you're looking at what your tax dollars are going towards, it's how to effectively manage government and all these different facets that mean to, that involve living in a city. So I think it absolutely is crucial. It makes sense. I know part of what folks are asking then are like, well, then how do we get it happening? Because we all recognize the need. I think this is one where I would say the focus would need to be really on impressing that on the executive branch, right? It's something that the administration and Mayor Lightfoot had mentioned in coming into the office. So it's clearly a priority and it's in the value set. But it's about making sure, and let's just keep it real since we're all on the same Zoom call, as folks are heading and looking towards re-election, this is where you remind them of like, hey, these are the things you said were valuable on your way in here. And so what's being done on that, on those different initiatives. So I think hearing it from a public in that manner allows us to move it more quickly, because you've got a number of folks that are members of city council who are already on board looking to get it moving. But when you're looking at a 50-member body, right, and you're trying to get over 26 votes, having the executive branch really do a full court press is what allows you to get to that point.
I'll keep it short on this, and yes, and I think Catherine's in the chat, around this Department of Environment, myself, Alderman Laspada's office, we introduced an order last year, actually directing the city to tell us how much it would cost and to do the analysis. So we've been meeting pretty regularly with our chief sustainability officer and the policy team as they prepare that work. And what you see in the release of the climate action pillars today is part of that. But we wanted to start well in advance of last budget season and didn't really get what we were looking for, but are looking to push for this budget season to figure out what that looks like. And to Ayana's question, it's about integrating those values. It's about coordination of major systems. And to Alderman Vasquez's point, it does have to be not just a council, but an administrative priority as well.
Definitely appreciate both your responses to that and your support for, restarting the Department of Environment. I think possibly to close us out, we have one more question. This is for all panelists. In your opinion, how can environmental and social justice voices compete with billions in industry lobby money? Locally, it seems that about 80% of Chicago City Council listens to the voices of industry. How can we get our representatives to listen to us? And this is coming from Jordan Parker.
Well, I'll jump in. I am a longtime organizer and activist, and I am seeing more and more the ability of activists and communities and organizations to influence outcomes. I think there's, for a good reason, increased sensitivity about environmental justice communities, all communities that have been left behind. And this is a very, very sensitive issue. No member of any elected body, I think, wants to be accused of discriminating against communities of color or low-income communities. And so, we've seen successes in communities to start the hazards that have been, or the outcomes that have happened in their communities. So I think this is a really great moment for organizing and protesting and demanding. And so the question is getting involved. I mean, the real issue is getting people more involved. Because one thing that members of any elected body know how to do, and that is count. They can count votes. And if they feel that their reelection is going to be threatened because there's a movement going on in their district or in their ward, I think this is a moment to do it.
Yeah, I would say wholeheartedly the same. I'd also add, just talk to your neighbors, right? Because I think there are people who are innately moved and want to organize and protest. And then there's also the other neighbors that maybe aren't driven or have a realization of how dire things are, but talking to each neighbor. And by that, I mean, not just on your phones, right? Like there's definitely something where if you're using your social media and phones, like the algorithms will lead you to other people that agree with you. And then it's great. You find your tribe of folks, but it doesn't help in building larger coalitions of people that aren't already with you. So being able to talk to literally the people on your block and tying those environmental impacts to the very real thing that people feel at their door, I think is something that moves people exactly for that reason. Like the ash tree inoculation was not a thing that I came in the gate waving the flag for, but enough neighbors, right, we're saying these are issues that are important to us, and that moves people. I think in really identifying those movable things and what are the pieces that you want to move forward on, you end up accomplishing more than if it becomes a question of somebody's values. Either you agree with us or you don't. It becomes so large and broad that it's hard for somebody to say, sure, I agree with you in theory, but what are the things that we move? So it's also picking which things legislatively you want to move in a way that allows an elected official who may not be on board with you to save face and go, yep, let's take that fight on. And there's opportunities, right? People want to be champions for their community. So sometimes it's like setting them up to do that will allow them to do the rest of the trip for you, which I think is important to kind of think through when it comes to negotiating on things.
The only thing I'll add, and this isn't always super popular from my side of the table, but don't vote for people who take their money, right? Look at who your elected is taking money from and demand that they do better, right? So if you've got somebody who is saying that they're working on a particular issue, then request that they don't take money from that lobbying group, right? Really simple. They take money from the lobbying group, don't vote for them. That's what I do.
And exposing that, I think, is really important for the leaders in a community. I just want to say, I got a question from a student yesterday. What are the best arguments that can be made to get people to be more active in environmental issues? And I said, look for the personal. We've talked about flooding in buildings because of the high water. People have all different personal issues. How about especially in environmental justice communities, the amount of asthma that you see, is asthma really so much an environmental issue? Yes, it is an environmental issue. So rather than just talking in general about the environment, looking for the thing that really affects a person's life, I think is the way to enter into this conversation about what climate change is doing to all of us in all these different ways.
I want to add something to that, and thank you so much, Congresswoman, for that point. I've been in for I think the last number of weeks, what I keep kicking around in my head is that save the planet is actually not the best marketing way to get the idea across. And what I mean by that is the planet's going to be okay. We won't be on it is actually what we're talking about, right? So when we talk about saving the planet or saving the environment, I think what it does in people who aren't already on board is it seems insurmountable. Like, how are we ever going to be able to do that? But the reality is, it's like, how do we save ourselves? Because the planet will rectify things. It will warm up. We won't be able to make it. And I think by not framing it that way, it becomes more challenging for people. And it's easier to like turn away and go, hey, maybe I won't be around when it gets that bad, as opposed to really thinking about ourselves as a species and what we need to do to maintain us, rather than trying to find another planet or moon or something to go to potentially ruin something else. I think really talking through that allows people to think about their personal stake in what we're trying to do in a way that'd be more effective than talking in terms that just feel hard for people to tackle.
Right, I agree.
I think that's a great place as we're going to end this. And I guess I want to thank Ayanna for moderating and asking great questions. I don't know if you have last words, but thank you so much. She's our city lead and has really been developing IEC City of Chicago program. Thanks again to all of these climate champs, Alder Andre Vasquez, Alder Maria Hadden, Congressperson Jan Schakowsky. Thank you so much for being climate champs every day for us. And thanks for joining us for Earth Day. Everybody have a great Earth Day weekend, better weather this weekend. We really appreciate all of your support. So thanks, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Andre, are you still on? What is that?
Yes.
The photo in your office, what is that?
So I got Fred Hampton, Martin Luther King, Ruth